Lord, we ask you to be with us, be with Dr. Kirkwood, and all of this in Jesus' strong name. Amen. Amen. All right, give it up for Dr. Kirkwood.
Thank you, Bob. I should have updated him on that. I am a retired family physician now. I do still work a little bit doing impairment ratings for the Workers' Compensation Commission in the state of Texas, but I don't do family practice anymore. And I'm not an elder at Parkview anymore because I moved to Navasota. So I live in Navasota now. And I'll give you a little bit of my history, how I got involved in the things I've written books about and so forth. But I grew up like maybe some of y'all have in the church, and became a member when I was 16 years old. Obeyed the gospel at age 16. We had a elder at the church there who was a doctor. He actually has been my mentor. He's the reason I'm a doctor now. But he knew about evolution, and he knew how to refute evolution. So that when I took biology in high school, and especially biology 2, I was able to answer some of the arguments that the teacher there gave against or for evolution, and the arguments I gave against it. He was a good teacher. He was a very passionate teacher. He loved teaching kids, but he came and just said, we can't argue about evolution. Evolution is just a fact. And I knew that wasn't true from what Dr. Torno had taught me. And so I've been studying it really ever since. My first book really that I read about some of the arguments against evolution was by Dr. Dwayne Gish. And I think I still have that book. It's only about that big. And it was called Evolution, The Fossils Say No. Still remember the title, Evolution. I've never heard this. And it's true. And that book is still true. The fossil evidence for evolution is just not there. That's probably one of the biggest evidences against evolution is the fact that the fossil evidence doesn't support it. Then let's fast forward. I go to University of Houston. I got my bachelor's degree in biology from the University of Houston. While I was there, I took a course called Population Genetics and Evolution, expecting to find out about evolution and evolutionary ideas. First day in the class, PhD level teacher said that the general theory of evolution belongs in a class of philosophy. Now, I had never heard anyone ever say that at his level. He said, we're not going to be talking about what he called the general evolution of theory. I would call it macroevolution. We'll talk a little bit about micro and macroevolution maybe tonight as we proceed. But that was about I'm going to date myself, that was about 1974, 73. Then I go to medical school and get out, and at that time, there wasn't a lot being published, but then about the late 80s, early 90s, Michael Denton's book called Evolution, A Theory in Crisis came out. Michael Denton was a medical doctor, but also a PhD, highly credentialed geneticist. And he said that the evidence is just not there for what's called neo-Darwinism, or the theory of evolution. Wow, okay, someone with his credentials. Then we had Jonathan Wells come out, another biologist. He wrote The Icons of Evolution. And he started showing that a lot of the stuff that's in the textbook, by the way, it's still in the textbooks, in the high school textbooks, are not true and have been debunked, and yet they're still there, believe it or not. And then came along Stephen Meyer. A lot of you know who Stephen Meyer is. Stephen Meyer came out, and then William Dembski, who wrote The Design Inference. Stephen Meyer wrote The Signature in the Cell. And then you had fellows like Douglas Axe, who wrote Deniable. Douglas Axe was a Cambridge-trained biochemist who showed that it's very difficult. We're going to quote him in a minute, one of our slides, that it's virtually impossible to have a protein develop on its own, de novo, just through natural processes. And that was the beginning of the intelligent design movement, I guess you could say, and I guess Philip Johnson's book, Darwin on Trial. That was another one that came out about that same time. Now, we're going to quote Richard Dawkins here in a few minutes, who said that evolution allowed him to become, I think he said, a fulfilled atheist, an intellectually fulfilled atheist. Well, the intelligent design allowed me to become an intellectually fulfilled theist. Okay, I guess you could say. And so that's what we're going to talk about. And then at the same time, about 1997, Michael Behe, a biochemist at Lehigh University, wrote this book called Darwin's Black Box. And it sort of changed everything to me as far as another profound argument against evolution. And in that book, he introduced the concept that we will be talking about tonight called irreducible complexity. And to my mind, it has never been satisfactorily refuted. I'll put it that way. Oh, it's been refuted, all right, but it's not been satisfactorily refuted, in my opinion. By the way, how many in this room have ever heard the term irreducible complexity? So I'd say at least half have. So I don't want to bore you to death with some of this, but I think we need to set up some of the basics before we get into it. Who knows what was Darwin's black box? I'm going to make this kind of open to the, he called his book Darwin's Black Box. What was the black box? Anybody know? It was the cell. That's what the black box was. It was the cell. Darwin knew about cells, okay? His book came out 1859. By that time, they had microscopes and so forth. He knew about cells. He didn't, not just him, but nobody knew about the inner workings of the cell. And that, for him then, it's a black box. This is a black box to me, okay? I know it's a computer, but I couldn't tell you how to program a computer to save my life, or how the inner workings of this is. Well, that's what a cell was to Darwin. And it turns out, as you all know, I don't know how many biology majors we have in here, but as you all know, a cell is not just a glob of protoplasm, because that's what Darwin thought it was. The cell has organelles in it, that has molecular machines in it. He didn't know about all that. And so fast forward to the 20th century and now into the 21st century, now we're learning more and more and more about what goes on in the cell. And we're all made up of trillions of cells. That's the cellular theory of life, right? We're one organism, but we're really made up of trillions and trillions of cells. And each one of those cells has just unbelievable biochemistry going on inside it by machines. And these machines have to be constructed some way, hence irreducible complexity. Let's talk a little bit just about evolution. This is Charles Darwin up there. I believe my wife cut off the full title. I believe it's supposed to be On the Origin of Species by means of Natural Selection, or The Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. People forget about that part of the title, but that was in his original title. And like I say, this came out in about 1859, and it changed the world. What Darwin thought was that through natural selection and survival of the fittest, life evolved from one primary source. That's the basics of macroevolution or chemical evolution, whatever term you want to use to describe it. It doesn't tell you how life got there, though, for natural selection to have something to work on, does it? That's the origin of life debate. So if Darwin would have left it alone with just that, he probably would have been okay. But he had to throw in that perhaps somewhere in some little pond where there were a bunch of chemicals, and this is in the book, there were a bunch of chemicals, some sort of energy source, may have been lightning or whatever, could have produced the first cell, and pop, life began. And that's really the origin of life. Research hasn't gotten a lot further than that. Talk to James Tour about that. But anyway, natural selection, survival of the fittest, that's how we all got to be who we are today. I like this definition of evolution. It comes from Kersey Thomas. And this is I think, a more precise, when we're talking about evolution, macroevolution, I think this is a good way of looking at it. It's following the laws of physics and chemistry. The concept is, through natural selection operating over vast periods of time, fortuitous favorable events happened that brought about successive more complex biological chemicals, which either fortuitously or through some identified property of matter concatenated, leading upward to protocells, cells, living creatures, and then to man. That would be, I guess, the big picture of the definition of evolution. So when we talk about evolution, this is what I'm talking about. Now, since DNA was not discovered until 1953 by Watson and Crick, obviously, Darwin didn't know about DNA either, okay? But the DNA molecule was finally discovered at Cambridge University in England by an Englishman by the name of Crick and an American by the name of Watson. And anyway, they discovered the DNA molecule, and now there was a proposed mechanism of how evolution could occur. And that would be through mutations in the DNA molecule. And through those mutations, favorable mutations, obviously, they would have to be favorable, then that genetic material is passed on to the next generation. And with enough of these mutations, then new species could be formed. That's the theory. That is the neo-Darwin theory, or neo-Darwinism, also called the modern synthesis. And that's still taught in the textbooks of high schools today. So like I said, Richard Dawkins, everybody know who Richard Dawkins is? Probably the most famous atheist. Evolution allowed me to become an intellectually fulfilled atheist. So some people would say, why does it matter? Okay, does it really matter if you believe in evolution or not? Can I still be a Christian and believe in evolution? I mean, yeah, maybe you can, but there's problems with that. First of all, I don't think it's biblically correct. And secondly, it ain't even scientifically correct. There's no basis for evolution from a scientific point of view. And hopefully we'll point out at least one refutation of that tonight, and that will be irreducible complexity. So you need to keep this in mind as we're talking. And that is, evolution must be, by definition, undirected. It cannot be directed. If it's directed, that means there's an intelligence behind it. Okay? And that's not what the naturalists believe. So it has to be undirected. It has to come about naturalistically. Cannot be any intelligence behind it for evolution to be for evolution to occur. So there's no guiding hand behind evolution. That's real important. So it's going to be obviously a very, very slow process. Correct? It's going to take millions and millions and millions and millions of years. John West, who's with the Discovery Institute, has said that unguided chemical evolution and the Darwinian natural selection mechanism are the most scientific drivers of science-related erosions of faith in God, whereas complex design in nature are the most significant drivers of science-related support for God's existence. Why would he say that? Why would he say that? Because if chemical evolution is true, there's no creator behind it all, then what's our purpose on this earth? We lose purpose because we're just here. In fact, that's a good thing. A good thing to ask the atheist. Why is there life? Ask the astrophysicist there. If you want to see someone get their shorts in a bind, ask them, why is there life? Or how to define life. How would you define it? Erwin Schrödinger, who wrote the Schrödinger equations of quantum mechanics, said his only definition of life was something that just keeps on going when it shouldn't. David Dennett, evolution is the universal acid that dissolves religion and moral beliefs, because there's no really basis for morality if there's no God. I mean, I'm not saying that evolutionists and the naturalists are immoral people, but where do they get their basis for their morality is what I want to know. So I think David Dennett is correct. Evolution is the universal acid that dissolves religion and moral beliefs. So what did Darwin say in Origin of Species? He makes the comment, or he writes, if it can be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. So that's what has to happen. There has to be successive modifications, very slight, one step at a time for evolution to occur. You can't just start with a cell and then have a puppy dog. It's just, evolution doesn't work that way, okay? Just doesn't work that way. Has to go one cell, then multicellular animals, and then smaller animals, then finally on and on and on. You understand what I'm saying? So even Darwin said, demonstrate that that can't occur, and my theory will absolutely break down. Well, someone did do that, and that someone was Michael Behe when he wrote Darwin's Black Box. But just as a little side note, the mechanism of neo-Darwinism does work for adaptation, okay? But not evolution. Microevolution, that's adaptation. That's been shown, and nobody disputes that. Animals change. We see that all the time. You know, there's all kind of manner of variability within species. You know, you have small cats and big cats and tigers and lions and so forth, or you have wolves, or you have domestic dogs, you have jaguars, and you understand what I'm saying. How does that occur? Through adaptation, microevolution. But it does so, and this was another key point that Michael Behe points out and Darwin dissolves. It does so as a result by taking information away, not adding information. So a mutation can occur that can be beneficial, but that mutation doesn't add new information. And there's a limit to how much adaptation can occur. You can only get a dog so small or so big, or a horse so small. You know, they've bred horses now that are so small they're about the size of a dog. But you can only get a horse so small or so big. That's adaptation, and it does occur, and it occurs by the neo-Darwin mechanism. But it has its limits, and that's the problem. So what is irreducible complexity? It's really not that. I was trying to explain this on the golf course today. And my fellow golfers, it was like I was talking to the deer in the headlights. You know, could you repeat that? What was that? It's really not that difficult. It's really not that difficult. And I'm going to just quote Behe himself. By irreducibly complex, I mean a single system composed of several well-matched interacting parts that contribute to the basic function wherein the removal of any one of the parts causes the system to effectively cease functioning. That's maybe a little bit complicated, but you'll see what we talk about when we get into some examples. So if something is irreducibly complex and you take one of its parts away, then it no longer functions to do the job it was meant to do. It's really that simple. That's irreducible complexity.
It'd be like taking just even the smallest screw out of a machine and the whole thing falls apart.
Exactly. That's a good analogy. Behe in his book uses a cartoon, a Ruberg cartoon, where it's got these contraptions where it starts one thing and you go through all these permutations, and then finally at the end the ball drops and you capture a mouse or something in a cage. If you took any one of those things away, it would cease to function. It turns out virtually every organ or system in our body is irreducibly complex. I can't think of anything that is not irreducibly complex. So natural selection then can only choose a system that is already working. Okay? What would be the point in selecting something that wasn't working yet? How would it get to that point? There'd be no point in it. And so if it cannot be produced gradually, then it would have to arise an integrated unit in one fell swoop for natural selection to have anything to work on. You can't work on just the parts. It has to have the system has to already be functioning. So mutations can change in DNA. We've already talked about that. They can change and allow for adaptation, but what mutations cannot do is change all the instructions in one step. They just can't do that. Now, the evolutionists had a problem with this early on. Some of the biologists had a problem with this. Richard Goldsmith proposed what he called the hopeful monster. And the hopeful monster at the time was, well, what if all of a sudden you went from just like a bird to a dinosaur, all at one fell swoop? Well, that would be a hopeful monster. Problem is, there's no evidence for that in our records that we have, in the fossil records that we have. So Behe made it real simple for us, and that was the mousetrap. Mousetrap doesn't have a whole lot of parts, but if your job is to catch a mouse with a mousetrap, it has to be fully functioning or it's not going to do you any good at all. So say all I had was the platform. In this case, it's a wooden platform. Would that catch a mouse? I guess if you put some glue on top of it, but no. If you just had, if the mechanism for catch, if all you had was the spring, would that catch a mouse? No. It has to have all of the parts to function. So evolution says that each one of these parts has to come about gradual, but evolution doesn't have a goal in mind. There's no goal in mind. Can't have a goal in mind. That's the problem with origin of life experiments. They want to try to concatenate all these chemicals to try to produce a protein, but the researchers that do that have a goal in mind. But natural selection doesn't have a goal in mind. So it wouldn't work unless they were all there. And proteins are the same way. Our bodies are made of cells, as we said, and they're made of molecular machines that are made of primarily proteins. And it's the folding of these proteins that work. These proteins are made up of amino acids, and we're talking about hundreds and thousands of amino acids. They have to come together to form the right protein with the right chilarity, the whole 9 yards for it to work. It can't do it in one fell swoop. And virtually every system in our body is irreducibly complex. So what are some examples? I just listed a few. I tried to pick some that Behe had already used, and some of these are in my book, The Evolution Delusion, as well as my other book, The Purpose-Driven God. One of the biggies was the bacteria flagella. You know what a flagella is? Yeah, it's kind of the motor of the bacteria. It's how the bacteria moves. Well, it turns out, if you look microscopically at a flagella, it's an extremely complex machine. How does it come together? How do all those parts come together from an evolutionary standpoint when nothing's going to work until they're already there? We're going to talk about the blood clotting cascade, the cascade system in just a minute, but same thing. How about the immune system? We don't think about the immune system, but for the immune system to work, all the parts have to be functioning together or you're in trouble. And that includes antigen-antibody reactions, it includes complement, it includes a whole host of systems for your immune system to work. And if you have deficiencies in any one of those, you're going to be in trouble. You're going to be sick. Vision. Now, one thing I want to point out, irreducibly complex can be for a flagella, which is like a motor, or it can be for a system as well. And so in vision, you have a little bit of both. You've got the anatomy, and Darwin would have known about the eye. He would have known about the iris and the pupil and the cornea and the lens and the retina. He would have known all about that. Vision is a whole lot more than just those anatomical structures. And that's in my book, I talk about that in my book as well. It's a chemical reaction that has to occur. It's its own cascade. And all these chemicals have to react once light hits it, and then they have to go back to where they were to begin with. And they don't work unless they're all there to begin with. How about the endocrine system? Pituitary gland that manages the thyroid and all the other systems of the endocrine system. That's irreducibly complex. We're going to talk about ATP synthase, so I won't spend any more time talking about it right now, but it is irreducibly complex. So let's go to the clotting cascade. I don't know if you can see that very well. My wife actually drew that. Now, That's in my book. In medical school, we had to memorize all this. I'm not going to give any tests on this, so you don't have to memorize any of this. But just to know, what's the point of the clotting cascade?
So you can heal.
So you don't bleed to death. Okay, you punch a hole in the bottom of a milk carton, it's going to run out. Nothing's going to stop that milk from running out. Okay, if you put it in the bottom of the milk carton. You punch a hole in your finger, like when you're giving some blood or something in your arm, you don't bleed to death, do you? No. Now you can get shot and maybe bleed so much that it overwhelms this cascade. I'm not saying that. But typically speaking, minor wounds we do not die from. Women giving birth. Well, I was when I was a student and then an intern as well, delivering babies, it always amazed me how much blood there was. And then when that placenta came out, just all that blood. But women didn't bleed to death. You know, they survived all that. They clotted really pretty fast. And the reason they clotted was because of the clotting cascade. So what does we mean by cascade? You think of a cascade like water coming down a waterfall. It cascades. Something triggers an event, a cut, and then the cascade starts. There are 13 different factors when it comes to blood clot. You got the Hageman factor, you got the Christmas factor, you got Stewart factor, von Willebrand's factor, you got all these other factors in there. They all have to work. If you're trying to do this evolutionary, how does that happen? Okay, let's just start at the top. I'm going to make a Hageman factor, and it's going to have to be activated. Is that going to stop you from bleeding? No, it's just the start. So how does evolution start this process? Okay, now we go to the Christmas factor. Now it's activated by the Hageman factor, who activates PTA, and you have activated Christmas factor. Is the organism going to quit bleeding yet? No, it's going to keep bleeding. All this has to happen. Then you've got the Stewart factor. Then you got thrombin to thrombin. And eventually you get down here where you have fibrinogen turning into fibrin, and that's when the clot starts to happen, okay? Now, you've gotten there. How did you get there? But there's one other problem as well, isn't there? What if you don't turn that off? What happens?
Just it clots everything.
Do what?
It'll clot all your blood, right?
Right. They call that a stroke. Okay. If you get a blood clot that goes to your brain, it's called a stroke, and it ain't good. Or if it's in your leg, we call it a thromboembolism. Or if it's in your heart, in your lung, it's a pulmonary embolism. You die from clotting too much. You have to turn this off too. How did that happen evolutionary? I don't know, but that's irreducible complexity when it comes to the clotting system. It's pretty simple, isn't it? Really pretty simple. Now, keep in mind how difficult it is just to produce one functioning protein. I mentioned Douglas Axe, the Cambridge trained, he did his work at Cambridge actually, and he's a member of the Discovery Institute. And he looked at how unlikely it would be to have just one functional protein, because that's what all these clotting factors are. They're basically proteins. And the ATP synthase we're going to look at is a protein as well. But just to get one functional protein, it would take 10 to the 7th power iterations or tries, and that's one chance in 100 trillion. That's a very big number, in case you didn't know that. Very big number, very unlikely to occur. How about ATP synthase? Anybody know what ATP is?
That's the stuff for energy.
Yes, adenosine triphosphate. That's exactly right. You aren't here today if you don't have ATP in your body. In fact, no animals alive that they don't have ATP in their body. It is how we derive energy. The actual mechanism of how energy is derived, we know what happens, but still we're not exactly sure how it produces energy. But what happens is if you have ATP and it's degraded to ADP, which is adenosine diphosphate, you only have 2 phosphates now instead of 3, that's where the energy is produced. But now you got to make more ATP or you're going to run out of energy, right? That's the ATP synthase molecule. And it's schematically there on your left. Very complex molecule. And it's what creates more ATP. This is going on thousands and thousands of times in your body. It's going on right now where you're sitting there doing nothing. Otherwise, your muscles couldn't contract. You couldn't breathe. Your body needs energy to do all that. And it comes from the ATP synthase molecule. It's a fascinating molecule. We don't talk about it very much. But that's how we get our energy. It is called the energy currency of human life. That's what ATP is. And ATP synthase produces this. So again, ATP, adenosine triphosphate, energy currency of life, it is this dephosphorylation of ATP to ADP that creates the energy. Otherwise, and that occurs in an organelle in your body, in the cell called the mitochondria. Do y'all remember the mitochondria from high school biology? Okay. I still remember Miss Good saying, your little mitochondria produces energy when I took it in high school. And ATP synthase is what produces that. So we convert ADP to ATP, we got energy. It is a molecular motor, kind of looks like a turbine. This is a cartoon version of it, a little bit more. Kind of looks like a turbine. It is also an enzyme, and it is also an ion pump. So the question is, what is the explanation, evolutionary explanation of how this remarkable machine was, and I use the word made there, okay? That's not the word the evolutionists would use. They would use some other word, or how did it come about? I would like to know what their evolutionary explanation for ATP synthase is. When you can't get to the very end unless you've followed all the steps getting there, and it's a tremendous protein molecule, you just couldn't do it. And here's kind of the peculiar thing. It takes ATP to produce ATP, requiring ATP synthase. It's kind of the chicken and the egg thing, okay? You need ATP to produce ATP synthase. Explain that. So that's only two. I mean, you could go on and on, but you get the point. Irreducible complexities in every organ of your body, in essence. So I have a few thoughts. First, science should be about the best explanation, okay? Naturalism, the worldview. I would think most people in this room have a Christian worldview. Am I correct? Okay, hopefully. The naturalistic worldview is a different worldview, but it's not science. It's a philosophy, okay? It's a naturalistic philosophy. It's not science. So science should be about the best explanation, and it should be agnostic towards theism or naturalism. What do I mean by that? It should be agnostic towards atheism or naturalism. It shouldn't care. That's what I mean. Science doesn't care. If the best explanation is a theistic explanation, so be it. Science doesn't care. It's agnostic towards it. But the naturalists are not, okay? They have to have a natural explanation. They can't let a divinity in the room. Secondly, and I would say this, supernatural should not be the first explanation for a phenomenon. That's not my point here tonight. But when all else fails, it shouldn't be rejected either, okay? It shouldn't be the first thing. And let me tell you, when I was in University of Houston and doing biology, there was a book called Guyton's Book on Physiology. Anybody here ever read Guyton? Anyway, I used to circle how many times that book said mechanism not known, mechanism not understood. This ATP synthase hadn't been discovered yet. So I mean, when I read Guyton, or at least not to the detail we have it now, but it's still difficult to understand how you get energy from that ATP to the ADP. But over and over, I would circle that. We've learned a whole lot more since 1974 when I was in school. A whole lot more. But the more I learn, the more it actually cements my belief in God. The more science we've learned, it hasn't eroded it. It's done the exact opposite. So from my point of view, intelligent design is the best explanation for irreducible complexity. And that, again, that's my opinion. So, have there been some criticisms? Someone was asking me before the talk tonight, have there been some criticisms about irreducible complexity? Yes, there have, and it's all from the naturalist, as you might know. I'm not going to go into all of them. One of them was an early on, and I didn't list it here, but well, maybe each one of these parts had a function that we just didn't know of yet, and their ultimate function was built on that first primary function. It's a good story, but nobody's ever showed an example of that. Okay, nobody's ever showed an example of that, so it's just a good story. These two researchers, Pollan and Matsky, demonstrated different kinds of protein had some sequence similarity to each other in different species, which supports the idea they came from an ancestral gene. That's their explanation for irreducible complexity. Now, you're a highly intelligent group here. What's wrong with that explanation?
Similarity doesn't show that it actually is reducible to that thing. So
That's right. It's the wrong argument.
yeah,
That's the problem. It's the wrong argument. Okay, it's the old homology argument. You know what homology argument is for evolution?
Yeah.
That's where Darwin got his start. Because mammals have 2 eyes, 2 ears, hearts, and lung. We have a lot of similarities, okay? The pentadactyl design of our limbs and all that. That's the homology argument. Doesn't explain how they got there. So that's the problem, and you hit it on the head. Evidence of common descent is a separate argument. So if all mammals have eyes. I still haven't described how the eye came into existence, have I? All I've shown, they've all got eyes. Okay, all animals use ATP. So what? I still haven't shown how that ATP synthase got started to begin with. It's the wrong argument. So it doesn't work. Then there was a guy named Doolittle, and I talk about this in my book as well. Dr. Russell Doolittle, biochemist, showed that the clotting cascade was not irreducibly complex. And he seemed to know what he was talking about. Very bright scholar. And he showed, irreducibly, the cascade's not irreducibly complex, but here's the kind, I want you to look at this. These are the kind of words Dr. Doolittle, I love that name, Dr. Doolittle used in his description of how the clotting cascade came about. These chemicals like the Christmas factor and the von Willebrands and all that appeared, or they sprang forth, or they were born, or they arose, or they were unleashed. What's wrong with this argument? It's stupid what's wrong with it, because it didn't tell you where they came from. It just said they just came on. They just appeared. Not a very good argument. So, as a result of this, some have said we're wasting our time even doing this because neo-Darwinism is dead. It's not dead. I mean, that's still the primary theories. Neo-Darwinism is still the primary theory of evolution. But there are some now questioning it as being a proper mechanism for causing macroevolution. One was Lynn Margulis, who's no longer with us, but she believed that neo-Darwinism couldn't possibly explain macroevolution. And then there was Larry Moore, and I got his quote here: neo-Darwinism cannot account for macroevolution, even though it is in the textbooks at all states. So I'm going to list, there's all kinds of theories now. I mean, you can go and Google or do whatever you want to do, and I'm going to list what I would consider maybe the primary theories against neo-Darwinism, new theories, if you will, because they realize it doesn't work, and irreducible complexity is one of them. And there was, first of all, there was punctuated equilibrium. This was put forth by Niles Eldridge and Stephen Jay Gould, who's also passed away. Punctuated equilibrium is kind of like that hopeful monster I mentioned earlier, okay? Evolution occurs and there's burst of evolution. And all of a sudden you have just a whole lot of evolution going on at one time. That's punctuated equilibrium. Something changed. There's one problem with this. There's no evidence for it. And most people don't even consider punctuated equilibrium anymore. It had its time, it's no longer there. Then you have the Evo-Devo. I just like saying that one, but it's evolutionary development. And that is mutations in the Hox genes causes evolution to go faster. Because all these mechanisms, by the way, the one thing they do have in common is something has to speed the process up. Punctuated equilibrium, Evo-Devo, and the last one on there, the natural genetic engineering. All these are attempts to try to speed the process up because they realize the fossil record doesn't support it. And what we talked about already, the neo-Darwin mechanism doesn't support it. But Evo-Devo says mutations in the Hox genes causes macro changes. What are Hox genes? You can't answer because you've been answering all night. Does anybody know? Hox genes are the genes that cause the embryo to develop. That's what the Hox genes are. So if you had a mutation in the Hox genes, then that could cause a mutation that could be propagated that was of a macro nature. Well, there's no evidence for it. What there is evidence, there may be some as far as adaptation, but most of the time when you change the Hox gene, that embryo doesn't survive. They die. So it's not a good theory at all. And then you have natural genetic engineering, and this is from James Shapiro, and that is organisms change in a cognitive way. They decide I'm going to become something else. What does that sound like to you? Intelligent design is what it sounds like to me. Dr. Shapiro's got a big problem. There's no evidence for this, by the way, but these have been put forth because people are seeing that neo-Darwinism doesn't do a very good job of explaining macroevolution. So I'm going to end with just a few short quotes here from the Bible. Beware lest anyone cheat you through philosophy and empty deceit, according to the traditions of men, according to the basic principles of the world, and not according to Christ, Colossians 2:8. And then from 2 Timothy, and for this reason, God will send them a strong delusion, that they should believe a lie, that they all might be condemned who did not believe the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. And I think we've been given a big delusion when it comes to evolution, hence the title of my book. And then finally, I just read through the book of Job and read Hugh Ross's book on the book of Job. So it was top of mind, I guess, last night or the other night when I was putting these together. Therefore, I've declared that which I do not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I do not know. There are some things we just can't explain. I get that. But evolution is not a good explanation. So with that, I'll take any questions you might have. Yes, sir.
Of the three arguments that were just posed for, I guess, neo-Darwinism, those three that you just mentioned, I think the Hox gene seems the most compelling. But I would ask the question, can science actually explain genetic, I guess you would call it a genetic mutation, right? Or like a genetic abnormality. Can science actually explain mutations?
Yeah. A mutation is just a change in the genetic information in the DNA, where the information in the DNA is all there through the nucleotides and how the nucleotides are arranged. So if you change one of those nucleotides, that's a mutation. When I was in high school, I was taught that all mutations are bad. Okay, and that's pretty universally true, but it's not 100% true. Some mutations are beneficial, but like Behe says, when you do see that, it results in a loss of information, not an additional information, and that's what you need for evolution to occur. You need more information. You don't need the loss of information. But there's one mutation that occurs in the human body that's actually beneficial in some areas of the body. That's the sickle cell gene. Okay, that's a mutation. But it actually has some benefit in Africa. You know what that benefit is? I think I heard it. Malaria. Right. It helps to fight off malaria. Are those people healthier because of that mutation? Generally? Well, no. Sickle cells is not good. But sickle cell trait you can live with. And sickle cell trait helps protect against malaria. It is a mutation. It is a beneficial mutation when you look at it from that point of view, but it is not it doesn't add information.
Dr. Bo, to Preston's question, is it true then when cells are replicating themselves that there can be copying errors and those are mutations?
Yes, and most of the time those are corrected very quickly, okay? There's actually a mechanism for taking care of those copying errors. But the vast majority of mutations, I would say, are not beneficial. And the problem with the Hox gene, and I'm not an expert in all this, I'm just telling you the arguments that are made by people a lot smarter than me, like Stephen Meyer and other people. And that would be that the Hox gene is not sensitive to those mutations. A mutation to the Hox gene almost universally causes the destruction of the embryo. It doesn't survive. It sounds like it, like you say, theoretically, it might be a way to do that, but in reality, it doesn't. It's not beneficial.
Yeah. About the Hox gene, I've heard too that it is selecting from existing parts of the body plan. So can you speak to maybe there's been, I think it's Hox gene, or unless I'm wrong, Hox gene mutations have caused fruit flies to have extra wings.
Yes.
Antennas to actually turn it.
Yeah, a lot of the Hox genes embryologically have to do with the body plan. That's exactly right. And you get these really gross mutations when you see that.
From existing information.
Yes.
Other limbs. And
a lot of our body plan information, though, is epigenetic, though. Did you know that? It's not all about the genes. Dawkins says it's all about the gene. Guess what? It isn't. There's a lot of epigenetic information that we still haven't grasped our hand around, like how the embryo is oriented from the head to the foot and things like that. That's not genetic. That's epigenetic. That's outside the genetics. That comes from the mother, but not from the genes of the mother. So anyway, we digress a little bit about that. Anything else? Yes, sir.
Why in 2026, when there are really brilliant scholars, scientists, biologists who know for a fact that Darwinian evolution is basically a lot untrue, why, in your opinion, is it still taught as fact in the school, in high school textbooks?
I actually addressed it in my book. I call it the elephant in the room. Okay, it's the elephant in the room. I'm like you. There's a lot of smart people that don't believe in Darwinian evolution, but a lot of them won't say that because they can get in trouble academically. So that's one thing. I call them closet creationists, if you will. But it's primarily a worldview. Okay, it's a worldview. If I cannot believe in the supernatural, then what else do I have except a naturalistic cause, even if that naturalistic cause is nothing but a bunch of stories? It's the only thing I have. Okay, so they don't even, intelligent design is considered quote unquote pseudoscience by these people. Okay, but I agree with it. A lot of smart people that ought to know better and they don't, but it's for their worldview, in my opinion. They just can't see it any other way.
I would say it's a diabolical conspiracy.
It may be. Absolutely. I think yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. But they have, and that diabolical conspiracy consists of that worldview too. I just can't have it any other way. I forgot the quote now, it's in my book, but someone said they just cannot let that divine foot in the door. We just can't let that in there. And I forgot who said that.
Richard Lewontin.
Yes, thank you. Who said that? Yes. They just can't let that divine, they'll come up with all kinds of stories to keep the divine foot out. They just can't let that in. And that's why it's not allowed. Intelligent design, as far as I know, still can't be taught in public schools. Not supposed to be, at least. Why? I mean, if it's alternative theory. Now, I think things are starting to change a little bit. And Bob, you might be seeing this some a little bit, and Chris, you might be seeing some of this too, as far as changes that are going on in the world. There's a movie coming out at the end of this month. April the 30th, I believe it is. And help me out with the name of that movie. I'm blanking on the movie. The Story of Everything. You need to go see that, okay? And you need to grab everybody you got, our friends that you've got that maybe are on the fence post about intelligent design and Christianity and so forth. It's not a Christian film necessarily, but it is an intelligent design film. And I'm actually renting the entire theater at in College Station and taking people from our church to see it. I've seen the trailer on it, but it's based upon Stephen Meyer's book, Return of the God Hypothesis, basically. And it's going to be, I think, fantastic, but we'll see. And anybody here old enough to have seen the movie Expelled with Ben Stein? Oh, that's a classic. Yes, sir.
I wanted to ask,
Like 12 years.
for clarity's sake, so are mutations and adaptations the same, or is an adaptation the result of a?
Adaptation is the result. Okay. There's nothing sacred about the words natural selection, by the way, survival of the fittest. And Darwin didn't coin those words. He didn't come up with those. Those were already around. In fact, I think his grandfather coined some of them. But that happens. I mean, natural selection does occur, and there's mutations that can occur. He talks about it in Darwin's Doubt, for example, the polar bear. There's mutations that occurred in the polar bear that allows the polar bear to exist in the climates that it could not exist in otherwise. So yeah, the mutation, natural selection selects for that mutation that is beneficial. Yes.
And you were able to explain how, or I guess the environmental factors that determine mutation, even if it's not like a conscious choice by the animal to say, hey, I need to change some things in my genetics to accommodate for my environment, or else I won't survive. But is there really a deeper why for, I guess I'm trying to really understand and grasp why the mutation happens. What tells the genes to change?
It's a mistake.
Yeah.
It's a mistake. It's not a why.
Okay.
Okay, but it's a mistake.
Error.
It's an error.
Okay.
Correct. It's an error in the genetic information. Yes, but it's not a why. You're right. There's no conscious effort by the polar bear to, be able to digest fish better than the bears in south of there. It's not a conscious thing, but it's a mistake in the genetics. Yes. And that's why most of the time mutations are going to be not beneficial. You don't want mistakes, but there can be some mistakes, but you don't see kind going from kind. And I talked about the fossil evidence. There's no fossil evidence. You think about for evolution to be true, and it has to be very gradual, then there has to be many, many different transitions between one species to another. These are called transition states. Dwayne Gish is the one first talked about it in that book I talked about that I read back in 1968 or 69. We still don't see those transitions. It's a problem. Darwin knew about that problem, by the way. You know what Darwin's explanation for the problem was? We just hadn't found them yet. Okay? We just haven't found those transitions. Now, they want to point to the horse. They want to point to now the new one is the whale, which is really funny because when I was in school, the whales came out of the water. Now you got animals going in the land, going back in the water to become a whale. It's nonsense. And Jonathan Wells wrote about that too. Yes, ma'am.
I've read that I've always distinguished mutations from adaptations because mutations generally tend to be detrimental. But I've read that for a lot of the different adaptations, it actually is pre-programmed into the animal. So like the cavefish, the blind cavefish, it is actually, there are things that are chemically already there so that if you bring them out of that dark environment, they start producing seed offspring because of these little triggers that are triggered.
I don't think that's adaptation, though. They're adapting to the environment from what their genetics allows them to adapt with. We're talking about maybe a different use of the word adaptation.
So when you say an adaptation through
I'm
mutation,
talking about microevolution. Yeah.
so you're talking about like maybe.
Well, I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example because what animals did Darwin use in his book Origin of Species? Actually, no. The finches are not even in that book. The animal he talks about them later. Okay, the descent of man and others, but it's not actually in Origin of Species. That's common. People don't know that. The one, but that would be a good one. Because even if it was finches, by the time it's all said and done, did the finches turn into anything but a finch? No, they were still finches. Okay.
Wasn't it the moths?
But what they used, no, that wasn't Darwin. That was someone else, and that was actually Jonathan Wells showed that wasn't even true. What they did with that, what he used was domestic animals. Okay, he used dogs and he used sheep and he used cows. That's how he showed evolution. Evolution. He used domestic animals. So I've got 2 dogs at home. They're white labs. Okay, beautiful animals. But if I put them out in the wild where wolves are, do you think they would survive? No. They have been bred through adaptation, I guess is one way to say it, but through that process to get to what we want. But domesticated animals are not what we're talking about when we're talking about macroevolution. That's microevolution or adaptation. I use the 2 words interchangeably. To me, microevolution and adaptation are interchangeable. I tend to steer away from the word microevolution because that's all people hear, evolution, evolution. That's all they hear. Macro is a whole different thing. You do not see species turning into other, I shouldn't use that word either. I should use the word kind, okay? Because there's different ways of defining species. But you don't see kind turning into another kind in the fossil records. You don't see that. You don't see it now. But you do see, you got all variety of dogs, all variety of cats. They're all part of the same family. They've adapted. Yes, sir.
Dr. Bo, and then this question next. So in the medical community, which you're obviously an expert in, how is this thought and considered? And is it, and I've never thought this before, so steer me off if it's a bad question, but if I have a Christian doctor, or I have a doctor who believes, as a materialist believes, are they gonna treat me differently? Are they gonna prescribe different drugs? Are they gonna do different things?
Man, I would hope not. I don't think so. You know, I think they all take oaths not to do that. But when it comes to certain ethical things, absolutely. Okay, when you get to things like stem cell research, okay, you get to things like in vitro fertilization, things along that nature, the ethics will be totally different between the Christian doctor and the materialist doctor. But most materialists, most doctors, and then when I was in medical school, I had friends, they hadn't thought about this. Not like I had, obviously, because I talked to them about it. Because they had grown up in the scientific world, they just accepted it. And that's the other elephant in the room. Most people that are not biologists, let's say they're with some other type of a scientist, they're not experts in the stuff we talked about today. They haven't ever heard about irreducible complexity because they just accept evolution because it is the paradigm that we believe in. And that's why they accept it, not because they've studied it. I think most of my friends in medical school, if they'd have studied it like I did, would come up with the same conclusion I did. But most of them hadn't even studied it. But you make a good point. I think on the ethical stuff, it definitely makes a difference.
Ms. Solomon, you had a question?
Yes. Oh, so Preston's question, you said that mutations were mistakes. And then to Ms. Rebecca's example of the cavefish, you said, yeah, that's adaptation / microevolution. So would you consider those mistakes as well, rather than like?
I don't think so. I don't know about the cavefish, by the way. I've never studied that. So I'm just talking the way I would look at it. I would say they were constructed that way. They're adapting to the environment. That's a different adaptation that I'm talking about. Okay, I'm talking about survival of the fittest, where there might be a reason I don't know, a giraffe with a longer neck would survive better than a giraffe with a shorter neck, okay? I don't know. That's a bad example, but no. I think the word adaptation is a little bit different. Yes?
So I'm wondering, like, when we're looking at examples of like pre-programmed adaptation in that sense versus examples of like microevolution as a result of passive selection, is there a discernible way in which we can tell that they're different, like that it's actually a different cause, but they look the same?
Well, you said pre-programmed adaptation. I think that's the difference. Animals that can adapt to their environment that are pre-programmed to do that, that's part of their genetic makeup.
Okay. So
Okay.
there's a way that you can like look at the genes and see that that's programmed versus.
Yeah, I mean, you could tell where a mutation is because the other animals of like kind won't have that same mutation. Yes, yes.
And then Princess next, but tailing off of Ramey's question, as I recall, the concept of junk DNA 25, 30 years ago is now that's being discovered to be actual information that could cause a beneficial adaptation.
Right. Well, do you know what junk DNA is? Okay, the idea that most of your DNA doesn't seem to have a function. That's what the idea was. When they first came out, they came out with a genetic code for, let's say, human beings, for example. There was a lot of DNA that they didn't know what it did because most of the DNA codes for protein. Okay, and that's what we study. More and this was a prediction by the intelligent design community. William Dembski and some others said what they're going to find out is there's no such thing as junk DNA. They just hadn't discovered what its use was. As we've gone on and on and on, we're getting less and less and less junk DNA. We're now understanding that DNA that we didn't know how to function, and the theory was this is leftover DNA from evolution. That's what the materialist would say. The reason there's so much junk DNA in there is it's leftover. The stuff you don't even need anymore. Turns out not to be true. There's probably no junk DNA. Good point.
My point is that so-called junk DNA has information. So when you have a cavefish that moves, he's blind, no eyes, he moves into a light environment and then offspring develops eyes, it's because that DNA was now activated.
Right.
Because of the light cell.
Very likely, yes.
That's what has been, I guess, put forward as a logical explanation.
Yes.
Not have been seeing it being used because
Exactly.
it wasn't in the right
It was
environment.
turned off, it wasn't needed.
Yeah.
And the same way that animals can adapt to hot or cold weather, not just by migration, but by changing fur and
Right.
fat patterns, it's built in.
It's inherent,
I've
right?
been told that's called epigenetics. Is that incorrect?
No, that's still genetics. The junk DNA is still genetics. It's still in the DNA. Epigenetics is outside the gene. In the cell wall, for example, there's epigenetic information.
That would be
And there's more codes than just the DNA code. There's the ribosome, there's the sugar code as well. James Stewart talks about that. We talk about the DNA code. There's actually the sugar code too. I don't know anything about it though, so don't ask me. Yes.
So my question is, I think 3 or 2 semesters ago, I took a biomechanics class, and they had like a professor from UNT Health talk to us. Oh, not a PhD student, and she talked about locomotion, and she was comparing different animals and how, also like with the worldview of evolution and how this limb, it works for this animal, and so this animal also has it, and that, and then you can see that type of structure in the human beings, just basically like what
That's homology.
exactly.
That's homology. To me, that points to a common designer. Okay, that's my argument for homology.
Right.
But that was the argument that Darwin used. They called it the pentadactyl design. That all mammals have kind of similar design. Like a humerus and a radius and hands and all that. But in whales, it'll look a little different, and other animals, but it's all similar. There was a guy by the name of Barra. Do y'all remember this Barra's blunder? Barra tried to explain what, I forgot Dr. Barra's first name. But he was trying to he was a materialist evolutionist, and he was trying to show how evolution worked. And he showed the Corvette, originally built in 1950. And then he showed the 1960 version and the 1970 version and the 1980 version and the 1990 version. See, that's how evolution works. That was called Barra's blunder because what was he actually showing? Design. Nobody's stupid enough to know that a car evolved from a 1950 model to a 1960 model. But they referred to it's. I got that in one of my books too. But it was referred to as Barra's blunder because it was not a very good way of trying to describe how evolution worked.
Taking that concept, I'm taking tissue engineering right now, and I'm learning about cells and stem cells and like DNR reprogramming of cells. And so in like the zebrafish, for example, or like the lizard, if you cut off, for example, like a lizard's arm, it can regenerate. And I'm wondering if we're saying, okay, there's similarities in like if they're making that argument, why is it that human beings don't have that same function in them?
Oh, that'd be a nice one to have, wouldn't it? We weren't designed, my answer to that, we weren't designed that way. We were wonderfully designed. There's a great book out by Stuart Burgess. If you can get it, you need to get that book. He is a bioengineer. Am I correct?
Yeah, he was here 2 weeks ago.
Do I?
He was here 2 weeks ago.
He was here?
Yeah.
Oh, forget it. You already know it. I heard him speak in Cambridge a couple of years ago. I didn't get to go to his lecture at the Science and Faith Conference because it was a breakout lecture, which I didn't like because there was other lectures I wanted to hear. But I've got his book, and I'll be reading his book. But he makes, there's the idea that the body is the human body is very poorly designed, and if there's God, God would not purposely design a body poorly, right? One example is why we have the throat and the esophagus so close together, and as a result, we can wind up choking. That's an example. Well, there's a lot more to the design than just choking, okay? And Burgess deals a lot with the biomechanical stuff, like how the foot works and so forth, because the foot's been given as an example as a poorly designed organ in the human body. Nothing could be further than the truth. Yeah. Good questions.
I'm trying to put myself into the mind of an atheist or just someone who doesn't believe.
Yeah, and I do too. I do too, because that's what you're going to come up with. They're going to come up with their arguments, and you got to be able to try to answer them. Yes.
So if you could show them these facts and prove that there's existence of a creator, how could you tie that to the existence of God and heaven and how we need to be saved? Because I'm trying to think about if I'm talking to someone who doesn't believe in God, how would I say there is a creator and
then get to the Bible? Yeah, to get from one to the other. Yeah. Well, first, if they don't believe in God, that's why I've written my books, okay? Because that's the first step. Now, you can always start. There's two ways to start this. I like the way anybody know James Tour? Fantastic chemist out of Rice University. He argues against the origin of life experiments. He says of all nothing. He uses very, very strong words. He says they're junk. Okay, they're nothing but junk. They're not good. But sometimes he doesn't start with the science part. Where he starts with is the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Can you show that the resurrection was a real phenomenon in history? If you can do that, you can skip the rest of this because then it'll all fall in. But if you can't do that, then yeah, the first step is to try to show that there's a God. To me, then it's logical that if God did create the universe, he's going to be a personal God. He's not going to be just a God of pantheism. He's going to be a personal God, and he's going to have communicated to us. And I think there's just ample evidence within the Bible itself through through prophecy, and about a lot of other reasons to believe that the God of the Bible is the God that I know. But you're right. The first step is to get them to believe in intelligence of some sort. And some people are, quote unquote, agnostic. I don't have a lot of sympathy for agnostics. I'm sorry. You're either going to believe or you're not. Okay. And that's the way I look at it. But I've got a daughter-in-law who's agnostic.
Last question from Kirkwood.
How do atheists try to explain origin or creation, whatever you want to say, that first hell or whatever?
I don't know necessarily. I know when it comes to the creation of the universe, they don't have an explanation. In fact, if you read Stephen Hawking's book, what Stephen Hawking said was that's just an answer. That's just a question we can't answer. So we'll just leave. What happened before the quote unquote Big Bang? What was there before? That's a theory that science can't answer that. But my question is, we talk about survival of the fittest. Why does an animal care if its progeny go on and living after it does? You ever thought of that? Evolution says that's what evolution's all for. Why? Why would a bacteria care whether more bacteria comes after it? Have you ever thought of that? And yet they mutate to survive, don't they? I mean, look at all the problem we're having with antibiotics now and mutations that occur in bacteria. That bacteria is mutating to what? Survive, but not the individual bacteria, but its progeny that's coming after it. My question is why? I've never heard the answer to that with a naturalistic point of view. Understand? I've never heard their point of view. Why? Why is survival of the fittest? It has to be an innate law of the universe, is all I can figure out the physicist would say, just like any other constant or whatever. But I've often wondered, well, okay, so why does it care? And I was being a little bit facetious when I said scientists have a trouble describing life because life seems to disobey one fundamental law in physics. What law am I talking about?
Entropy?
The second law of thermodynamics, entropy. That's exactly right. It seems as if life disobeys that because life is very organized, isn't it? So I listened to some tapes by Sean Carroll, who's a cosmologist, physicist, and so forth. His explanation of that is life is just a temporary thing where entropy will continue to expand after that. It's a temporary state. He compared life, and I'm not kidding about this, he compared life to putting cream in your coffee. When you first put the cream in the coffee, it looks all disorganized, but over a period of time, it kind of smooths out and it looks nice and brown. That was his explanation for life. Yeah. All right. Thank y'all. I appreciate it. Thank you.